Hello, my name is Autumn Brown, and I am a researcher with Oklahoma State's Oklahoma Oral History Research Project. For our Activism and Education and the Civil Rights Movement Oral History Project, today, February 17, 2020, I am meeting with Bruce Fisher to discuss his experiences with school desegregation in Oklahoma City. Mr. Fisher, thank you so much for talking with me today. Let's begin by just telling me about yourself. Where were you born and about your family?
My name is Bruce Fisher. I was born in Chickasha, Oklahoma. And my mother's name was Ada Louis Sipuel Fisher. My father's name was Warren W. Fisher. I grew up in Chickasha till about the third grade. Then I moved to Oklahoma City, where I started at Edwards Elementary School and stayed there until the sixth grade, graduated in sixth grade. Lived in Carbondale Addition, which was a all-black neighborhood. And we moved out on Spring Lake Drive in 1962, which put us into the Northeast High School residential boundaries. And that's when I started going to school with white people. It was my first experience at going to an integrated school. And at that time, Northeast was like 99% white. And we were the second African-American family to move on Spring Lake Drive at the time. So it was quite a culture shock. I don't think I'd been exposed to racial issues and very much. I kind of knew something was going on with my mother, but again, I didn't. It was all black neighborhood, so we didn't come in contact with any white students or anything. So it was we didn't know that. I didn't know the severity of racism until I started going to school at Northeast High School. And immediately, the Northeast Shopping Center down the street from where I lived, I saw signs that said, in some of the stores that said for whites only, and which was a shock. My next door neighbor was a kid named Richard Pierce, and we were the same age. He was from a large family. So he and I were the same age, and we became friends, immediately. And so I think it was as much of a shock to him as it was to me when he discovered that these places that he could go to that I was not welcome at. But he was my buddy, and his dad worked in the oil fields, and his dad was not nearly as racial tolerant as his mother was, and so Richard would often be at my house playing, or I playing at his house, and I'll never forget it. When his dad would come home, his mom would come out the back door, "Richard, your dad is here." And over the fence, Richard would go. So when Dad was out of town, we'd load up in the car in the station wagon and head to Northeast, Northeast swimming pool, and just a great time. So I also realized that something was different when we moved to Spring Lake Drive. Right down the street from where I lived was a huge amusement park called Spring Lake Amusement Park. And we passed by it all the time. Giant roller coaster and huge amusement park. People screaming and only for me to realize that I couldn't go there. That was in 1962. So that was another experience that I had. Many times getting chased home from school, and I'd run, Richard would run. I said, "Richard, wait, what you running for?" It's me that happened. He said, "No," he said, they were kicking my butt too. so Richard had to run also. So when I got to Northeast, it was, I, for the first time, ran into teachers that didn't seem to care about me. Which was different. I mean, growing up in black schools, your parents know all the teachers know you and know your brothers and sisters, and if you got in trouble at school, they would know about it before you got home, and all of those things. And so immediately I felt a disconnect between me and the teachers. There were no African American teachers at that time in Northeast High School, so it was it's quite a difference. So that was kind of my initial observations about education and living. Chickasha, on the other hand, we lived in the neighborhood in Chickasha, it was segregated also. But we rarely went downtown. I can't even remember going downtown. I do remember that when my grandmother actually, because my mom was in Oklahoma City and my dad were trying to make get their life stabilized in Oklahoma City. So we lived with our grandparents and my grandmother, when she back clothes, she would come back and have me stand up and put the jeans, around me, measure this way, because we couldn't try them on. And so that's I thought that's where you bought them. I didn't know we couldn't put them on. I just thought that's where you bought, you sized up clothes. But Chickasha was a very, segregated community, but I didn't realize that because we basically stayed in our part of time growing up. So, but that was my early experiences with integration and education.
So when you were attending Edwards, that was it was segregated all black school, right?
Yes.
So what was it like? What were your experiences like attending Edwards? I mean, when everyone talks about segregation in all black schools, they talk about, lack of funding, books, things like that. So in your experiences attending a segregated school, what was it like in your experience?
I was unaware of any funding disparities. I was unaware of that. I mean, the teachers were great. They were caring. If we didn't have up-to-date books, we didn't know it. I mean, later on, I would realize the difference between but growing up, they did a really good job of insulating us from feeling less than. They did a really good job of making sure that we felt confident that we could do just about anything we wanted to do. So I didn't notice any funny. Looking back on it, I think about the things that we weren't taught. And I wonder why. I mean, how is it that I could be living in Carverdale Edition, named after George Washington Carver, and not know that that's who it was named after? I just know it's Carverdale. I only in the last 10 years that I know what Carverdale stood for. But how is it that I could grow up in Carverdale next to Edwards Elementary School, attending Edwards Elementary School? Friends who lived in Edwards Edition. Go to the park in Edwards Park, in the swimming pool, Edwards Swimming Pool. See the hospital up on the hill named Edwards Hospital. How could I be in the midst of all of that and not know who Walter J. Edwards was? But I didn't.
So who is Walter J. Edwards?
Walter J. Edwards. Walter J. Edwards was an African American who you see the people driving around in pickup trucks and pick up scrap metal.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a junk man. That's what he was. He was a junk man. Okay. And he picked up so much junk that he ended up working at a scrap yard, then owning the scrap yard, and during the late 30s, when the war broke out in Europe, Hitler was on the move. The price of metal skyrocketed, and he went from junk man to millionaire.
Wow.
1947 issue of Every Magazine, front page, listed the 10 wealthiest Negroes in America, 2 of which were from Oklahoma. Walter J. was one of them.
Wow.
But there again, he was a giant. He built over the 500 homes in Edwards Edition. He was the first African American to get the what's it called, FHA, housing, financing, security guarantees from the federal government. First African American to build neighborhood additions that guaranteed the homes through that financing plan. He owned many businesses. He was an absolute giant. And the funny thing about Walter Edwards is, in spite of all that money he had, His wife got sick and needed an operation. And because she was black, they would not admit her to any of the white hospitals in Oklahoma City. These were the religious-owned hospitals, the Baptist Hospital, St. Anthony's Hospital. None of the hospitals would admit black patients into the hospital. So he flew her to the Mayo Clinic where she had the operation. And we had black doctors, plenty, good, excellent doctors, surgeons and everything else, but we didn't have hospitals. We had small clinics. We wanted more clinics than hospitals. And so anyway, she went to the Mayo Clinic, got the surgery, but he came back and said that won't happen again. So he took $500,000 out of his checking account and built Edwards Hospital. And 1945, I think it was open for business. And about that same time, a guy named J.W. Sanford, who had been the president of Langston University, was good friends of the Senator Kerr, and Kerr became governor of Oklahoma before he was a senator, I think. And because of his relationship with Sanford, Kerr agreed to support the idea of creating a separate unit for University Hospital that became known as South Ward. Black folks called it C Ward for colored ward, but South Ward is what it was for. And that was the first time that African Americans had access to hospital care. And Walter J. Edwards, long story short, is he was, how could I grow up in the midst of, somebody that done so much and not know anything about it. So to all of the credit that I give my teachers, those were some of the things that we didn't get, and probably for the same reason, we overlook people in our own community, and it's pretty much true today. I mean, most of the time when people talk about Black history, they think about Martin Luther King, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, those kind of things, And I spent, 20 years of researching Oklahoma City African Americans, so I couldn't tell you much about the national scene at all, but I can tell you a lot about what happened in Oklahoma. And so that was, so Walter J. was an example of that. So next time you drive over the east side, and go through Edwards Edition, that was the guy named Walter J. was who built all of that. So
I have a family who grew up in Carverdale, and I think we still own my great-grandmother's house there, and I never knew that Carverdale was after George Washington Carver. I would have never known that.
Yeah. Your relatives live right across the street from where we live.
Yeah.
I lived at 1129 Beverly Drive, and your relatives live right across the street.
Yeah. Small world. So can you kind of describe the community, like when you were growing up? What was it like growing up, especially going from Chickasha to Carverdale to Springville? Like, what was the community like when you were growing up?
I would look forward to the summertime when first of all, growing up in Chickasha was with my grandmother. That was just so much fun. I mean, we didn't know what we didn't know. So when I moved to Oklahoma City, my cousins would, during the summertime, come to visit me in Oklahoma City. I'd go visit them, and I prefer they come to visit me. It was about, let me see, how many Huggins is this? Probably six of them family. And but there was something, and they sometimes lived in Chickasha, and sometimes they lived in Frederick. My uncle had a church in Frederick, and so Frederick was a small community and hot as all get out in the summertime. But I would look forward to the summertime when my cousins could come to Oklahoma City, because then I to pay back all the people that did me wrong. And because my cousin was coming to town there, so. But we Douglas Center was a recreation center right across the street from Carbondale. And our days were spent going to Douglas Center. We'd go there, we'd get up in the morning, put on our clothes, and head to Douglas Center. And at Douglas Center, we'd spend the whole day. And then in the evening, come back home and we'd play and in those days, Mama would come home and have dinner ready when Dad got home, and we'd eat dinner and then go out and hang out outside and play under the street lights until all manner of times. The afternoon went off 10:30, 11 o'clock. Then we'd come in the house and start all over again. In those days, they had we didn't have central heating there. If you were fortunate enough to have one of the big water coolers, then you had a nice cool place. In fact, those water coolers did such a good job. People have to turn them off at nighttime. The house was too cold. So, but Carbondale is a self-contained giant cul-de-sac, 2 ways in, 2 ways out, and there were 3 or 4 streets in Carbondale. But everybody knew everybody in the neighborhood. We played hide and go seek, and pretty much anything in Carbondale was where you could hide. So it was just a great little community to go up there. When we left and moved to Spring Lake Drive, then that was totally different. That was the culture shock. We moved out there. So now Northeast went from when I started in the 7th grade, and I was there from 7 to 12. When they started the busing to achieve racial integration in Oklahoma, I was just past the point of being able to be bused, so I didn't have to go to any other school. So 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade. In fact, it was in my senior year, junior and senior year, I think, that they started beginning to bus kids from one school to the other school. And my cousins lived over on those same cousins that they moved to Oklahoma City. They lived on near 48th and what is now Martin Luther King. They lived on 48th in Wisconsin, actually. And so they would have to ride the bus to Northeast. So I told my mother, I said, everybody gets to ride the bus with me. I want to ride the bus too. So she would take me out to my cousin's house and drop me off out there so I could ride to school with my cousin. Needless to say, I had a bicycle. I could have rode that school from where I lived. I could walk. It take about 10 minutes to walk to school. I had a motorcycle, so I could drive that to school, but I wanted to ride the bus. So,
yeah,
busing was an interesting experience for most people because when they were transporting people, our kids all the way across town to Capitol Hill and places like that. I mean, it was horrible.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the things that they experienced was horrible. We had my first, I think the first Black History program at Northeast High School. We had probably in 1969. We had graduated. And so by this time we had a vice principal that was an African American. His name was Dr. Melvin Todd. And I was pretty radical and militant in those days. A budding militant, you might say. And so I would hang things on my locker and stuff. And so Dr. Todd, we didn't have any real big racial fights at Northeast, mainly because we did, a good job, I think, of trying to talk it out. We had kids in our school that, white kids that were just as comfortable with being with black folks as they were being with white folks, and black folks just as comfortable being with white folks. John Hanson, who later became fire chief, was right in the midst of that. He was. So we would have these big meetings in people's houses during this period of time, and so we would talk through the issues related to race. then when Dr. Todd, sensed that we were trying to do something. So he got, he rounded up the militants and took them to his office and said, I think I know what you guys are trying to do. Why don't we have an assembly, and we called it a Black History program. He said, now we need a speaker. We need a speaker on this program. We have some entertainment, but you need a speaker, somebody that knows history, somebody that is knowledgeable of the civil rights movement in Oklahoma. And so he started looking at me. And he just kept describing it, kept looking at me, and I said, I finally I looked at him, I said, well, Doctor, I don't know nobody like that. So, because I didn't know who my mother was, she was just, mom at that time. And so he gave me the name of Dr. George Henderson, who had recently moved to Oklahoma City. And his area was race relations. He said, well, call this guy. So I called Dr. Henderson and invited him to come over to a program, and he came. And so we had a program, we had entertainment, Pat Brown, I remember her singing, Johann Kimbrough and his band was playing at that time. And we had a nice program. And looking back on it, I think that was our first Black History program. I went home and told my parents, I said, well, y'all should have heard this guy named Dr. Henderson. I said, he was really, really smart. And I said, if y'all listen to him, you might decide, parents might want to do something. So, Dr. Henderson was great. And he became my friend at that point in time, and I've admired him and loved him ever since then. Mm-hmm. So he was my first person that I could do. Now, mind you, this was during a time when, the Martin Luther King assassination, Kennedy had been assassinated, Bobby had been assassinated, Malcolm had been assassinated. I mean, the Watch Riot of '67, Denver, Chicago. I mean, these were the whole issue, the whole question of whether or not we wanted integration or desegregation, sanitation strike, 69, 68, 69. These were, rough times all over America. Oklahoma City, we had Ms. Lupin leading the sanitation strike, and the Theodore GX leading the Nation of Islam. The Black Panthers were underground if they existed at all. So it was a student killed at Capitol Hill. So these were not easy times in Oklahoma during this period. So it was.
Is there a reason why you used desegregation and integration separately?
There was a lot of questions as to whether or not we wanted to, separate. When the NAACP, when they were looking at this whole issue, Thurgood was heading up the Legal Defense Fund, and they were trying to provide the best educational opportunities that we could achieve. There was a part of the NAACP that fought for integration and fought for desegregation. Integration said we have a right to attend tax-supported schools as well as anybody else has a right to attend, which was the ruling in my mom's case. Desegregation said that civil bereavement was okay. Go to our own law school, as in Thurgood Marshall at Houston, Texas. But as long as it's ours. So if we supported desegregation, then we got a law school, which meant we got jobs, professors. If we supported integration, meant that we simply had a chance to go to OU.
Okay.
Didn't create one job.
Yeah.
So with the question of which do we want? Do we want our own, as long as it is equal, or do we want the right to attend, whether it's to attend the schools? So that was a big issue.
Okay. So can you tell me about your parents? What led them to relocating to Chickasha?
My mom used to tell me about the Tulsa race riot. And it got right over my head. I couldn't imagine what she was talking about. I knew my grandfather on my mother's side, his name was Travis Bruce Sipuel. He was born in 1877, 12 years after the end of slavery. And most people think, we're talking about something that happened a long time ago. It really wasn't that long ago. On my dad's side, my grandfather on my mother's side, Travis Bruce Sipuel, T.B. Sipuel, they call it. He was the bishop of the Church of God in Christ in Oklahoma when there was only one bishop, and that was him. So he was a pretty influential minister. On my dad's side, my grandfather was Travis Foster Fisher. So they got Travis in both my grandfather's father's names. So I naturally ended up being given the name Bruce Travis Fisher. When the NAACP looked for a plaintiff to apply for admission to the University of Oklahoma, I mean, it was no secret. It was happening all over the nation. Thurgood Marshall was looking all over the country for asking the presidents of the NAACP and their chapters all over America. We want to attack segregation in higher education first. Preferably law schools. He was a lawyer. He felt that attacking segregation in higher ed, specifically in law school, would have the best chance of getting the issue brought to the forefront, because these are lawyers. So he thought that they would have a better understanding of why ending segregation was a constitutional thing to do. So in Oklahoma, there was a guy who was heading up the newspaper called the Black Dispatch. His name was Roscoe Dungy. And Roscoe was by far the most significant civil rights advocate in Oklahoma history. No question about that. He was a giant. And newspaper publishers were the spokespersons of the civil rights movement for black folks. So you had Roscoe Dungy with the Black Dispatch in Oklahoma City. You had W.H. Twine with the Muskogee Cemetery in Muskogee, Oklahoma. And Twine trained A.J. Smithman, who became the publisher of the Tulsa Star in Tulsa. So these were the big three people. And so Roscoe, he asked all of his regional presidents to find somebody in Oklahoma that met the criteria that they thought would be served as a plaintiff for the case. So everybody's looking for a plaintiff. In Texas, the NAACP is looking for a person. And Louisiana, Kansas, they were all over the country looking for him. Roscoe, there was a minister, a doctor in Chickasha named W.A.J. Bullock. W.A.J. Bullock, I think his name. And Dr. Bullock had moved to Chickasha from Muskogee, medical doctor. And he was also by this time the regional vice president of the NAACP. And he thought that the Sipuel family would be good prospects for serving as a plaintiff, specifically my uncle, Lemuel Sipuel. So he called my grandfather and asked if we could meet with Lemuel and the family and discuss this idea of Lemuel being the plaintiff in the case. So they came to the house and he laid out the plan that the NAACP was looking for a plaintiff, and he knew that my uncle had graduated from Lincoln School. It was a valedictorian in his class. He had been in the war. He was back from the war then, and he thought that he would just be the right person for the job. Lemuel sat there and listened to him, but he said, no thanks. He said, I just got back from fighting the war and I'm gonna get on with my life. And so my mom was sitting in the room. She wouldn't invite, she was just sitting there. And, so when he said no, she said, well, I'll do it. Well, she'd also been valedictorian in her class. And Bullock thought it was great because he just felt that somebody in the Sipuel family would certainly be good because they didn't have to worry about losing their job because the church was going to be insulated from the most of the hostilities through the church. And so, but my uncle did think getting a law degree was a good idea, so he ended up going to Howard University and got his law degree for a while he even got in school. But so then after he denied and she said she would, then Bullock set up a meeting with Roscoe, and he took him on to Roscoe's office on 2nd Street, and he talked and he said, okay. So then Roscoe called Thurgood and said that he found, a plaintiff in Oklahoma, and he sent out, the back information about it and so forth. Thurgood wasn't particularly excited about the prospect of a female serving as plaintiff. During this time, I think the statistics were like 14,000 practicing attorneys in America at that time. Of that 14,000, maybe 1,200 were African-American attorneys. Of the 1,200 African-American attorneys practicing, 39 were women. Women didn't have, much of a chance in the court. I mean, first of all, the judges were not, most of the 39 women that were practicing that had law degrees were doing clerical type work in the first place. So he wasn't excited about the prospect of a female serving as a plaintiff on the stand. And so he was once in Sweat in Texas. But Sweat was more interested in not being, he didn't have the same, he didn't particularly want to be a lawyer, but they thought he would be a good plaintiff. But anyway, Mom was enthusiastic about being a lawyer. And so Roscoe pursued the idea of getting Mom to apply for admission at OU. And so he started the ball rolling anyway. So looking back, my mom was always thinking about, what would happen if Lemuel had said yeah. But she was so glad he didn't, because, with what happened in Tulsa, the same thing could have happened at Norman. Norman was a sundown town. And all it would have taken would have been one allegation that my uncle had been, touched a white girl, and that whole story would have turned out much different. So,
how does the Tulsa race riot relate to your mother?
My grandfather and my grandmother were living in Tulsa at the time, and his church was burned, the home was burned down. So rather than rebuild in Tulsa, he moved to Chickasha. thinking that Chickasha was a better community, only to find out that, my uncle was born in September of 21. And so I'm talking about a few months after. So my grandmother was pregnant with him when the riot occurred. But my grandmother is so far, she's more white than black. So, she was not interned when they arrested everybody. My grandfather, on the other hand, was obviously black. So he was rounded up. So they moved. They moved from Tulsa to Chickasha, only to find out that Chickasha was just as bad as Tulsa for the most part. And so, in fact, the last documented lynching that occurred in Oklahoma, occurred in Chickasha. My mom was alive when that happened, and she used to talk about that too. My grandmother told my mom stories about the Tulsa race riot, and my mom would tell us the stories. But again, nobody else was talking about it. None of my friends were talking about the Tulsa race riot. So they wouldn't talk about it at school. So it was just like I couldn't whirl my head. So it was. But that's how my grandparents knew about it. My mom talked about how the community was in such a frenzy when they started talking about lynching a person. You think about the images of sharks in blood-infested waters. And people are just the black men were getting their guns ready. Mom said that they were putting 2x4s around the base of the walls of the houses to stop the bullets, and everybody stayed on and lying down and laying down, not sitting up in chairs and things. The men, got their guns to go down to try and protect him. It was just a horrible thing, and he was lynched. So there was, but that's so there was no more safety in Chickasha than there was in Tulsa.
Why do you think your mom was so enthusiastic about becoming the plaintiff for the case to desegregate higher education?
We had We had two attorneys, I think, in our family, and so she wanted, she wanted to be a lawyer because she had other family members that were attorneys, and so. But she had planned to go out of state. Oklahoma had what's called the out of state tuition thing. So she had, basically been thinking she was going to use the out of state tuition fund to go to college. Or her dad was going to pay for it outright. Her sister had already was in Chicago during this time in a professional business school. So she probably figured that her dad was going to pay for it. But so when this idea of serving as a plaintiff came up, she bought into that idea, and she was pretty much perfect for the deal. When Roscoe, when he decided that she was going to be the plaintiff, he began to prepare her for the job. So he would take her and go all over the state of Oklahoma, visiting churches, raising money, which is why, my mom was so well known all over Oklahoma because, she spent, months and months and months, going to different churches, it's kind of like that. So you could hardly go to a place that they did not feel a closeness to my mom because she was there, speaking about the case and raising money. So she was just, unlike Sweat in Texas, he didn't raise any money. They had a deal in Texas where they would pay for a nickel. You could come and meet Sweat and take a picture with him. And it was using this event to raise money. to fight the legal case in there. And Sweat didn't even show up. You know, he was not an ideal candidate. He was not a willing candidate. But Thurgood was invested, in him. Thurgood knew that Texas had, in the race, we had money to be able to afford it, and he kept trying to, get Sweat to be the plaintiff. He was in line to get his case before the Supreme Court. But in Mama, on the other hand, she, this is what she wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And so it was, so she was just well suited for the deal. And as the months went by, she became better and better and better at speaking. And she was the face of the civil rights movement in Oklahoma. And she was articulate, she was pretty. She called, the press fell in love with her. They went from calling her the little skinny girl from Chickasha to the some kind of plane. I mean, they started giving a lot of complimentary terms they started using, with her.
Now, did she decide to be the plaintiff before graduating Langston? Or was this after?
After.
Okay.
She graduated in May and they came to visit my uncle in September. And she was introduced to law school within by October, I think it was.
Were you born during the time that she was a plaintiff during the case?
Well, typically they would ask my mom did I go to law school too. She said, in a sense. She was pregnant with me when she graduated.
Oh, okay. Okay.
She was, I was born in March of '52 and she graduated in August of '51.
Okay. Okay. Do you think your mom would accept the label of an activist?
Yeah, I think she would have been okay with it. Mom, she said that the reason she stayed at Langston was that she wanted to be involved with developing the next generation of what she calls social engineers. We use the term not social justice, but she called it social engineers. And she says her first engineer was Opio Toure. He was one of our students, went to law school at OU, ended up serving as state representative.
What was his name?
Opio Toure.
Okay. How old were you when you became aware of what your mom did and accomplished during the civil rights?
I was a freshman or a sophomore at Langston.
So, growing up all through high school, you had no idea that your mom desegregated OU's law school.
What we knew about my mom was she made great popcorn balls. All my friends loved the popcorn balls she made.
Yeah.
I was at Langston and she asked me one day to take her to Tulsa. And so I said, okay, so we drove to Tulsa. She was going to attend the funeral of Amos T. Hall. I didn't know it. She was going to. I said, okay, so. But I remember standing outside the church, and all these people were around and stuff, and then Thurgood Marshall walked by, and I heard Mama say Thurgood, and then he saw him turn around, look at her, and say Sip, and he ran over and grabbed that stuff and started hugging her. When I knew right away, I said, well, I know who he is. And if he called her Sip, he must be a really good friend of his. So on the way back, I said, now, what's this connection that you got with him? And then I began to put the pieces together. I mean, I've heard she spent her time not talking about hers growing up. She spent her time talking. I knew all about Thurgood Marshall. I knew all about Roscoe Dungy, Amos T. Hall, some of the other attorneys that she talked about with the case. She said that she had a dream team of attorneys. I mean, goodness gracious, I mean, she did, and but she spent time talking about them, not about her. But it was only, it was only in the years that followed, and more today than ever, that I realized, what she had to do. She had to do the same thing. Her and Miss Davis were in a they had a similar challenge. I mean, set aside the legal issue of getting in school. Getting out was the most important thing, because because this was a test not only of them, but a test of whether or not the education that black folks had received was as good as the education that white folks were getting. You see, Oklahoma had set up two separate teacher organizations. You had the Oklahoma Association of Negro Teachers. Then you had the Oklahoma Association of Teachers. And so the question was, did black teaching professionals do as good a job of training black students as whites did? And I think that in most cases it proved that yes, they did. In the case of Nancy Davis, she had to deal with the insults. She had to deal with the isolation her from the rest of the class. The same thing in my mother's case, Put all the students down in the front row, put a chair in the back row, put a cover around it, and that's what she had to study for. So I think, when they did some recognition things about this year at the law school, and I was telling President Joe, I said, setting aside the legal issue, she was the example. She was a great example of how you overcome other obstacles in education. I mean, she, the fact that she could, study with all of the racist things that they were doing, saying to her and doing to her, and still graduate, that's a big deal.
Right.
And then Nancy Davis, same thing. When you have, and usually, in both cases, I understand that the students were very supportive. In Mom's case, the white men in the law school, and I say men because when Mom was admitted, it was a week or two late in the summer session, and so she didn't have any books. She had to play catch up from. And so the white men in the law school, took her outside under the shade trees where the whites only signs, didn't apply. And they shared their notes with her, shared their books with her, and got her caught up. And because she was not only the only African American in law school at OU at the time, but she was also the only woman in the summer session. There were two other women in law school at the time, but they were not there during the summer session when she was there, when she first got enrolled. And so it was a real challenge and a test, And I think that what they proved, her and Nancy Davis proved, was our teachers did an excellent job of preparing them for higher education.
Do you recall your mom practicing law in Chickasha?
No.
Okay.
I've heard. She was talking about some case that she had that this black woman had killed this white man, and the mom said that she got a life sentence. she said, and that life sentence that she had got was unbelievable because she said everybody predicted that this lady was going to go to the electric chair for killing this white guy, and for some way, Mama was able to get him get up with a life sentence instead of electric chair. So she was real proud of that. She also was proud of the fact that after getting her law degree, there was a woman in Chickasha who applied for admission at the college in Chickasha. It was an all women's college at the time, and this lady applied for admission to the college, and they denied her. And so Mama filed a lawsuit against the college for denying this lady admissions based on the fact that she was black. And Mama was thinking, how stupid can you be? Here the person from Chickasha and going through all this other legal stuff, and then they're going to deny her, and but I think something happened and they ended up settling the case before they ended up going to the Supreme Court, I think.
Okay. I think that was the case that Dr. Anderson was telling me about. And I've been looking everywhere for that case on the internet, but I think I'm going to have to find it in like a law journal or something.
Cheryl Wadley, if you look at Cheryl Wadley's book, I think she gave us that.
She told me about that. I have it ordered off Amazon. So, can you talk about your mother's role as a teacher? So after she finished practicing law in Chickasha, she started teaching at Langston, right? Mm-hmm. Can you kind of speak to what you know of your mother as a teacher?
Yeah, she loved it. I mean, the social science department at Langston, she was the head of the social science department, was the most radical department on campus. It was the largest department, and in the late 60s, during the Vietnam War period, and she had the most militant kids on campus were her little students. So she took a lot of pride in the fact that she had these wild students that were smart. She reported, but they were, and so when I enrolled at Langston, she called a bunch of them in the office. She said, two things she said I don't want to happen. She said, I don't want to see him in trouble, and I don't see my name in the Underground Railroad. They had a newspaper called the Underground Railroad. Mm-hmm. She said, I don't want to see my name in the Underground Railroad. But she really took a lot of pride in the military student. Like I said, she wanted to train what she called the next generation of social engineers. I mean, she could have left Langston any day mm-hmm. and gone anywhere, and particularly to the University of Oklahoma. They really wanted her down there, but she wouldn't go. Mm-hmm. I think it was George Nye that first asked her to serve on the Board of Regents for the University of Oklahoma. He wanted the distinction of being able to make that appointment himself. But they wanted her to retire from Langston in order to do it because they couldn't have an instructor at one college on the mm-hmm. Board of Regents of a major college like OU. So she wouldn't do it. And then, but after she retired, David Walters saw the opportunity of being able to get her. Sylvia Lewis had already been, by this time, Sylvia Lewis had been on the Board of Regents, so she was not, Mom was not the first African American to serve on the Board of Regents. Sylvia Lewis was. But David Walters called her and asked her if she would be willing to serve, and she said no. She was, her dad had died at this point. She was working on her, only thing she wanted to do was write her biography. And so she said no to David Walters, and he had somebody else call her, and she said no. He said, would you just talk about it? Can I come see you and we talk about it? See, he first asked her to come down there. She said she wasn't going. So then I was over the house that day, and his entourage showed up and they came to the front door. And I opened the door, he came in, and he talked a little bit about it and then asked her again if she was willing to serve. He said. So she said, well, okay, she would. And so she agreed to serve. Now, Mom had been placed on it. She had served on the OU Foundation before being asked to serve on the Regents. It's kind of the stepping stone position that you do to go. And this was during the Anita Hill time. Mama wore this big old button to the foundation meeting. Says, I believe in Anita Hill. During that time. So, but David Walters asked her and she agreed to do it. And so he was real pleased that she served on there.
Do you know of any of the challenges to your mother or to your family considering her active role in the movement?
By the time, I came along, it was the fight was over, but, for the most part. She was more concerned with funding issues for the university. There was an incident that occurred when the funding for teacher insurance coverage was at risk, and so she was in a fight with the administration at Langston at the time because she was not in favor of them forcing the teachers to pay more out of their salaries for insurance. It was a budget issue for the most part. so she said she sent me over to the Department of Agriculture to pull the records of the A&M minutes in which they approved the budgets for the universities. And I couldn't copy the budget information, which included the salaries of all of the teachers. So I had to handwrite it out. So then she set up this meeting with the administration of Langston and about this insurance thing. And so that was a chance. That was the one instance where I saw her, get riled up by something. And what I remember was she was on her way to the meeting with Dr. Holloway and Dr. Manning, and she said, Dr. Fisher, there's no need to be, upset about it, because they knew she had the salaries of everybody's salaries. And she was threatening to give them to the Underground Railroad guys. To publish them in that Underground Railroad thing. Because it was such a disparity with some teachers were getting, with doctor's degrees that were being paid more, but, being paid less than some of the people with bachelor's degrees, how they can do that kind of thing. So she said, they said, we don't need to get up, no need to get upset about this. She said, oh no, I done got my adrenaline up now, we're gonna fight. So she, and then, Mom, she loved getting a good fight every now and then. she loved it. So.
Well, she was a lawyer, so.
And she gave me some advice. She said, what was I doing? I was doing something. And she said, anyway, growing up, it was always, I just knew it was, she told me this a long time ago, so I always know it. She said, don't admit nothing till you talk to me first. She said, it's not what you did, it's what they proved you did.
Right.
So growing up and having a lawyer in the house was a pretty neat thing for me, because every now and then I needed representation.
What do you want people to know or remember about your mother?
that she believed in the Constitution. I mean, you had two basic methods of dealing with the whole issue of civil rights. You had people like Thurgood and the Legal Defense Fund that was challenging the application of the 14th Amendment equal rights provision. But then you had other situations that the law didn't apply to. We had no legal recourse to it, and that's when we had to appeal to the acts of civil disobedience. And those are people that we didn't have laws to protect them, so they had to challenge the system through civil disobedience, and that was Miss Luther and the civil rights in the city movement. So that was the two methodologies of how we were going to deal with civil rights, and it took both.
Mm-hmm.
It took both to get us where we were trying to go at that point. I think that she would really want to see more activism in America than we have right now. By any means necessary. Because I think she would be surprised that there's not more things being done right now with the kind of things that are going on in our federal government today.
Mm-hmm.
So I think she would want to be a part of the fight.
So do you know the picture where your mom is like leaning over the table and she's looking at the camera?
Mm-hmm.
What is she doing in that picture?
There's a book when you're certified to practice law in Oklahoma. There was a registry, and you signed the registry identifying you as being have met the requirements to be able to practice law in the state of Oklahoma. That's what she signed.
Okay.
What you don't see on that picture is my uncle was in it. He was there when she was signing that.
Okay.
The one that went to Howard got his law degree.
Yeah.
And he was holding me.
Oh.
So on all those pictures, there were several, about 5 or 6 pictures of that occasion. And one of them is when they pan around and he's holding me at the occasion. So I was like this big.
Yeah. Okay. And then lastly, do you think your mom's work has impacted education today, and why?
It was what her case proved was that at that point in time was that even if you believe in separate but equal, how can you afford it? Because all it took was one student, one person, to say that he wanted to study any graduate program, and the state would have to then either decide whether they're going to build a separate one for him, for black folks, or we're going to let him go to school for white folks. And it was just impossible to operate a dual system of education and be able to afford it, because it just made no sense.
Mm-hmm.
And they couldn't afford to do it. So the few schools that did benefit from separate but equal, like TSU, got the Thurgood Marshall School of Law, were some of the last of the schools to really get to see any benefit from that. Thurgood Marshall is one of the top law schools in Texas now, and so can't say it's all bad,
Mm-hmm.
but we do have a right to go to University of Oklahoma, and so that was a good decision also.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to fight on all fronts, and so but I think she would like to see more activism right now.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add? Okay, well, thank you for talking to me.